Ladies and gentlemen, chess is a complicated game. That is no secret. You know what else is no secret? That I've been going to the gym. New people, I don't usually wear tank tops in my videos. Anyway, a couple of months ago, I asked you to submit questions that you could ask a chess master. Anything on your mind about the game that will help you improve. Like over 200,000 of you participated on this community post, and you boosted the questions that you wanted answered the most to the top. And so, ladies and gentlemen, I firmly believe that this video will help everybody from beginners to intermediate to even advanced players how to think about the game and improve their thought process. Timestamps are in the video player for every single question, and in my opinion, the last question, question number 10, is just as important as question number 1. So if your attention span gives out, come back to this video, watch it a couple of times, but you usually do that anyway, right? All right, here we go. Question number 1 comes from Aditya Kashyap, and he says, how to make plans in the middle game? This is a question that every single chess player is constantly asking me. How do I make plans? And Aditya's question was so highly voted, he has a second question in that blurb. You're gonna see it a little bit later. So folks, this is what I'm gonna tell you about plans. Okay, this is the first way to answer question number 1, and then we're gonna flow this into question number 2. How do you make a plan in chess? Your plans in the middle game, which is the second phase of the game between the opening and the end game, need to stem from your opening. What does that mean? Well, let's get into a few examples, okay? Let's say you are playing the London system with white, d4, d5, bishop f4. Now, if you don't have an opening that you play, you gotta get the basics of the game down first, because essentially what you're trying to do is learn middle game plans, like you're trying to learn a really complicated technique in the kitchen that will take 4 hours, but there's a 75% chance you'll burn toast. Right? So you need to kind of fill in the gaps first. So you should be able to explain to me or to anybody the plans in the various positions associated with the opening that you play. And if you freestyle openings all the time, it's going to be really hard to teach you this. So, for example, in the London system, you should be able to say the following. When my opponent develops the light squared bishop out, I know that that destabilizes the b7 pawn. And so my plan is associated with bringing my queen out to target the weakness and playing on the queen side. And I accomplish this plan with the move c4. If my opponent were to take, I'm very happy with this. I get 2 bishops in the center of the board. And if my opponent denies this, then I play knight to c3. And I do knight to c3 only after pawn to c4, because otherwise I would be blocked in and my queen wouldn't be able to get out. And that is generally the way I play this. Now, furthermore, I know that in London, the e5 square is very valuable. So for example, if the light squared bishop doesn't come out, then I can go for the other plan, which is something revolving around controlling the 2 center squares. So I would like to plant my knight on e5, and that will oftentimes allow me to put some attack on the opponent's king over here. Sometimes I like to castle long. You see, that's what we're doing. Now, this is just a London system. So for example, if we just go all the way back to the beginning, let's say with the black pieces, you play the Sicilian dragon. Well, first of all, the Sicilian, and then there's stuff associated. You know that in the Sicilian dragon defense that your counterplay is associated with this bishop. And so the plan of your opening would be to play this, maybe knight on c6, sometimes queenside counterplay. That is the stuff that you need to bring to the table before you engage in a competitive fight. Now, the second question of this video, and I showed you 2 openings, right? Let's just show you one more, e4, black plays c6, the Caro-Kann defense, okay? Or let's just do a different one. Let's do the English opening for white, okay? Let's say with black, you play e5, the reverse Sicilian defense. Here, your plan could be to develop your pieces, or depending on how white sets up. Like, for example, if white plays g3, black will play knight c6, bishop g2, here, like we're just developing, and now white already has plans. White wants to play e3, knight e2, and d4, and this d5 square really is what white's opening revolves around. What does black want? Black wants to create a little bit of counterplay on the king side, maybe the f pawn, so that when short castle happens, the rook is behind the pawn. You get the point. I'm droning on for minutes at a time, but the way you start the game flows into that middle game. And now we will speak specifically, more generally, I should say, about the middle game. So this second question belongs to Janai, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, Shelton. The second question, how to formulate a plan based on imbalances. Improving at positional chess we'll actually cover later. A few people submitted a couple of questions at a time. So what does that mean? Imbalance in a position. Imbalance exists in a couple of ways. So first of all, if we're talking about, let's say, a game where we play with the black pieces, and the opponent decides to go for a queenside castle versus a kingside castle, okay? This is one of the degrees of imbalance, and as you build more experience in the game of chess, you will know about these imbalances, and you will consciously pick them up. The whole point of this video is to stimulate the thought process. So, this is one of the imbalances that I was going to talk about. When there are opposite side castling, you want to attack with pawns on the enemy. So for example, here, let's say white doesn't play a move like h4, h5, and instead goes here. Then here, black could play c6. And it's very common to springboard your pawns first. We'll talk about attacking later. Why do I say pawns first and not something else? Well, like, if your queen goes to attack a full house, that's not gonna work. You need to attack with the pawns, removing the defenders from their posts. And then if the opponent gets a little bit scared and tries to prevent you, you have backup. And like, let's just see how quickly this can go bad. For example, this is already very bad for white because rook to a1 is borderline checkmate. So this has to come back. That doesn't stop us. We're still going to come down here. And knight is coming, queen queen a2. And see, now you know how to play a position in general terms of opposite side castling imbalance. That is one of many imbalances. Then you have to learn how to play same side castling positions. Another imbalance like that we're about to jump into is like a knight versus bishop situation. So let's take a look at that. So the knight versus bishop debate, it occurs in certain situations, and you'll hear grandmasters doing commentary or international masters doing commentary say things like, oh, they have the bishop pair. It is better to have two bishops than a bishop and a knight in a lot of cases. But the bishops like open space. They are long-range pieces. So why would you ever give one away? Well, for example, this is a Ruy Lopez, right? And here there's a variation known as the exchange variation. Now, what I generally tell folks is that if you're going to trade a bishop for a knight as a beginner, it doesn't matter as much. It's really not a bad thing. It's like 3 for 3. But now what? Well, you've damaged your opponent's structure, right? And since you've given away your light squared bishop, what you need to do it now, ideally, is reinforce your light squares. Because if you put your pawns all on dark squares for the rest of the game, let's just say like this, why do you have a dark squared bishop and a bunch of dark squared pawns? And we'll talk about pawn structure later and balancing the pawns together, but you have to understand pawns build the position, they're the defense of the position. So if you're going to trade a light squared bishop early, you want to keep the position a little bit more closed, given the fact that you've granted your opponent that bishop pair. You don't want to open things up because they have the long range piece. They like that, and you want to regroup on the light squares. So for example, something like this. You see how many pawns we're putting on the light squares to counteract the existence of the enemy bishop, right? And it's not going to have that much mobility. You might also give away a bishop for a knight to create weaknesses. And like in this position, this is a weakness, although it is well known that something like this could happen. So when you give away a bishop for a knight, those are some of the things that you need to keep in mind. An example that I can give you, I'm going to flip the board again. I'm sorry, this is a very fluid lesson, but there's a variation of the Caro-Kann defense, which I talked about earlier, actually this one with the two knights variation, where black likes to put the bishop out on g4, and then if possible, this is like one of my favorite things to do, get a position like this. And you see I've just given away the light squared bishop, but look at my pawn structure. In fact, sometimes it can get to such a point, I put all 8 pawns. It's like the 8 pieces of Exodia, except it's not. And my dark squared bishop is very strong, and this bishop doesn't really have a presence. But you see, if I start opening up the board, and let's just hypothetically like trade this, like look what happens to the board, right? The bishop comes alive. My knight is all the way back here. Look how much space the bishops control. So that's a little bit, just kind of a general understanding of how to play positions. And you need to incorporate that knowledge I just talked about from your opening. So in your openings that you're playing, when certain trades are occurring, bishop for knight, that is how you formulate a plan. The last thing that I want to say about creating plans in middle games and based on imbalances revolves around squares versus targets. What do I mean by that? Well, as you get positional skills, which you will, by the way, we will discuss in this video, you're going to learn kind of the difference. Now, one thing that I pointed out earlier in the English opening, see that? That is a square that doesn't have a pawn supporting it, and you have a pawn, a knight, and a bishop. And a lot of your position can be improved as a transfer point through that square. You say, well, what about that square? Yeah, but see, white still has this option to fight for that square. Now, granted, if white does this, that gets weaker. So that is how I want you thinking about squares and the way your opponent can transfer in. Sometimes it looks scarier than it is. If black plays knight b4, that's not a very good move because we can control the square actually just by moving something there. And now it's protected. Next, we will kick out this knight and have a very nice position. So that's like how you think about the squares in a position, and pawns, knights, bishops coordinating on that square, using it as a transfer point. This is an example of a fusion of the two. It's squares, but it's also targets. That is a target. It is an isolated pawn, which is another concept that you fill in as you improve at the game. There is a very strong square in front. Like, for example, here you can use that square as a transfer point to then improve your position, hit the bishop, develop fully, get all your pieces in the game. But this is a backwards pawn. It's a pawn that has no neighbors, and the squares in front of it are being controlled. So you can line up your targets on this weakness slowly but surely and win it. At the same time, there are a lot of squares in the position that are very bad, and that's why in this position, white is doing very well, whereas like the targets that white has are well protected and can't really be exposed. So the middle game stems from your opening, but once you arrive there, you start thinking about the castling, you start thinking about the piece dynamics. I want you thinking about the knight versus the bishop, the bad knight, the bad bishop, the active or passive nature of the pieces, and the pawn specifically, the pawn structure, doubled pawns, targets, and square weaknesses. And that is really a good starting point. Now let's move on to number 3. Question number 3 comes from an individual named Yusuf, who also asked 2 questions, and his second question is also very good. And the question is, how do you punish mistakes by your opponents? Now, this is a pretty general question, and here's how I'm going to answer it. I need you all to start thinking about mistakes in a different way, because mistakes can happen in a one-move situation. It's just a one-move blunder, a loss of a piece. Your opponent gives it away and you don't see it. Like, for example, just the dumbest example I can possibly give you, the 4-move checkmate, right? Like, that is how you'd punish if they didn't see it, by doing it. That's it. But there's also something not as dramatic. And in all your games, trust me, you're missing these opportunities. Both of you are. Like, whatever level you are, it happens a little bit more infrequently at the 2000 level, but if you're like 1100, trust me, there are blunders all over the place. Now, sometimes those blunders are one movers and they're crazy obvious, but sometimes the computer will go, oh, well, this is a big blunder because of a 3-move combo, which you're incapable of seeing because you're not at that level yet. So an example that I'll give you, for example, like again, here, in a Scandinavian defense, okay, this is what we have. The queen rotates out this way, d4. Both players are developing here. It's really nothing special. Black trades. That is an inaccuracy. That's not a mistake. It's not good to give away the bishop there for reasons we've already discussed. It's a very open board. Okay, and now in this position, white finishes development with bishop to g5. For some of you watching, the move is obvious here for black. For others, not so much. Some of you might be thinking, okay, is this bishop putting me under any pressure? Should I castle? But I'm going to introduce something to you called the checklist. And every move, your opponent makes a move, you go, what do they want? Okay. Then you go, you identify what they want, whether it's scary or not. Can I create a check, which is the most forcing move in chess? No. Can I capture anything? Oh! Attacks. The last one would be attack. Can I attack something? And then you would decide. And if it's none of those, then you just play a solid move that improves your position. So one movers are right there for you. And the second kind of mistake is the one that I talked about, which is like, for example, this is my training game. Some of you might even recognize the position from a video that I did recently. In this position, my opponent, after I played rook c3, played bishop c8, looking to trade off my bishop. That is a mistake if and only if, if and only if, in this position, I found take, and the move knight to e4, attacking both of these squares. Black responds by defending both, and now I play g4 with the intention to play g5 and knight f6, and I am winning. But do you understand that the 4th move of this sequence is the reason why that first move is a blunder, right? So there's differences to this. Now, if you apply the checklist and stay very vigilant to your most forcing moves, what's hanging and what's on pre, that is how you're going to punish mistakes. But I don't want you thinking that when you're going to watch this video, let's say you're missing 33% right now, 1 in 3. of your opponent's blunders. You're not going to go 100% from here on out, but I want you to stay more vigilant, hold yourself accountable, and go from missing 33% to missing 25%, adding, right, 1, something like that. So that is the way I want you to think about it. And let's go to question number 4. Question number 4, we go back to Janae, who says, how to improve at positional chess. Now, this is a wonderful, wonderful lesson. What is positional chess? That's like the first place we have to start. So positional chess revolves around the slow and strategic improvement of your position at the same time the suppression or oppression of your opponent's plans and resources. Oppression is bad in the world, but it's good when it comes to oppressing your opponent's movements. That's easier said than done. We talked about it a little bit earlier, squares versus targets, figuring out that dynamic, how to negate your opponent trying to have a strong bishop or knight. We're going to try to use a couple of examples to really nail this point home and how to start thinking about it a bit better. So squares, right? That for your opponent. This, this, this. Now, for white, you've got 5 out of 8 of your pawns on the light squares. And, you know, if I want to get really drastic, let's do something like this, where, I mean, it's like 7-1. So if I were to ask you which bishop should you be happier trading, of course you have to trade your light squared bishop, right? Because you already have dark squared reinforcement. So maybe bishop b2 and trading off that bishop, because look at black's structure. Black has 7 out of 8 pawns on light squares, right? Just like you. So this bishop could, trading off that bishop actually could be very good potentially for you as well. It's actually funny, both of you want to preserve your dark squared bishops. So you want to at least kill off the counterpart. If you play this, I'm sorry, it's black's move, but let's say in this position you had played bishop g5, h6, and then took on e7, your family should probably disown you because that is an awful positional decision. Now your opponent will jump into d4, and what follows after positional domination, like a passive bishop, I want you saying stuff like that. This bishop is also passive, but this bishop is worse because black hasn't moved any pawns yet. White has committed the pawns forward and incorrectly. So that would be an incorrect positional decision. That's like the kind of the best early example I can give you. Another example, don't go off wandering into one-move threats. Because positionally speaking, why is this here? This is just going to get booted and benefit your opponent. Positional chess is very difficult. I'll give you an example from the recent Elo swap episode. Here, black has shut down the center and has more space on the queen side. But this is a fantastic move by the strong 2000 rated player. And the knight is forced to go back. And my partner in this game was a 1600 and played the move knight g7. This knight has no future. Whereas had it gone this way, it could replace this knight or at least keep rotating. And you'll notice, you see how dark squared weakness is? That's the way I want you thinking about it. Which dark squared piece is going to get in there? And that's exactly what happened. We went knight g7 here and here. And not only that, black ended up castling into this. So who else can fight for the dark squares very quickly? The queen, right? That is how you punish mistakes and positional liabilities. I had, if we go back to my training game, we can fast forward a little bit to the middle game, like right around here. And if I were to ask you again, what important square or open file you want to dominate, right? You notice black's position is very passive. Certain words that we're using here, passive. So a winning plan for white might be something like rook c1 attacking the queen and that square. And what you would do is you would transfer your knight into c6. That is how you play positional chess. For example, f5 grossly weakens e6. And that's not easy to think about when you're an intermediate player. You're like, ooh, me attack queen, right? Like that. And that is like those are 3 examples of how you can begin to think about positional play. In certain games, you're going to have bad pieces. Like you're going to have very passive pieces. We just talked about an example, which piece you want to trade for which piece potentially, and how that would affect the position. But this is, again, a brief video where I'm trying to introduce you to the concept, so that is a little bit about how you improve positional play. For question number 5, we go back to Aditya, who had our first question. He says, how to attack properly if you know the opponent's king is weak. I'm just going to say, you got to know how the opponent's king is weak. by looking at your future prospects. But here's what I want to say about this. I want you to think about attacking in chess. A successful attack does three things, okay? Number one, it checkmates, okay? That's a successful attack. Number two, it wins you material. The attack is so strong that the only way to avoid it is to give away material, right? So there's some something happens over there, some consequences as a result of your attack. Number three, your attack was played correctly. Now, there are many games that you're going to go on and attack, and the computer's going to hate it. It's going to find all these defensive resources. But if you conduct it in such a way that it's not a total disaster, you should be happy with yourself. There's no better feeling than winning a game of chess. I mean, like, maybe there's some physical feelings, but basically, that's number one, okay, about attacks. Number two, I want you to think about something that I like to call the in a row technique. What does that mean? If I were to give you several moves in a row in this position with white without taking anything, how would you organize your pieces in a way to create an attack? So you have the bishop, right? You might be thinking, oh, easy, bishop back, queen, bishop, battery. There's a word for you. Sure, but that's very easy to stop. I'll play g6. A better way to get your pieces involved would be a move like knight to g5. If this move is possible, because if it gets taken, then this happens. But then the board opens up. And then in this position, I want you to apply the in a row technique. Like, how does white win this game in two moves? Queen h5, queen h7. So that's the way you need to visualize it, right? But you're going to have resistance, like in this game. Like, let's say g6 happens. You're like, all right, well, I can't go queen h5 now. However, if I go here and get my queen to that square, then my queen can get some help, and then we might deliver a mate. Like, right, maybe I can transfer another piece. But if you just go all in on the queen side, okay, you just completely disregard what black is doing over there. You just, go. Meanwhile, black is like knocking on the doorstep of your position here. You got all this play over here, and you just go queen h6. You're like, no matter what happens, I'm going to go for that. Well, in the meantime, counterplay has been developed against your center, and a move can be played like this. Okay, and if you take, all of a sudden, I'm coming in and I'm just in time. So it's a lot of this is about realizing your opponent's resources. Now, are all opponents going to do that? No, it always depends on your level, the degree of counterplay that you face. This game is a great example. We just looked at this game, and here we literally found the only way not to get mated basically immediately. We knew queen h4 was coming, and so we took the bishop, and now this is mate. So we had to prevent it with the only move, which is queen takes pawn, preventing queen h6. We hung around in the territory long enough to create a defensive fortress for the queen coming in. We gave a check to win some time, and then we started clearing off the board, and very slowly we did, and there was no more attack. But that's, I'm a 2700 blitz-rated player. I've been playing chess for 2 decades, so it's not that simple. So I want you to think about the in a row technique and find the target on which you want to go create that attack, but I also want you to do it in a responsible and smart way. That is how you create attacks in chess. And by the way, many of them can stem also from openings. Like if you play the King's Indian defense, I'll play the traditional King's Indian defense, like this. Like, attacks here are usually on the king, but not always. What does that mean? Well, in the mainline King's Indian defense with like this kind of a position, what ends up happening is that black attacks over here, like f5, and white attacks the queen side. 99% of attacks at a low level are on the king. And so, you see what we're doing? Pawn storming, right? Pawn storming. That is another way to create an attack. We talked about opposite side castling earlier. If the kings are on opposite sides, create an attack with your pawns. Go send the minions to break everybody down. Bring them together so you can propel them. You see, pawns propel other pawns. It's a beautiful thing. Whereas if you just like absent-mindedly throw a knight at your opponent, well, not like a physical knight, but like, I'll give you an example, okay? If you just go here, what's the threat? And if you do the in a row technique, where's this knight going? Oh, well, Levy said in a row, so I can't get taken. No, you have to be safe. And by the way, even if I did say in a row, that's hanging, and so is that, okay? So, like, you could do the in a row technique, but you need to do it intelligently. If you can't go forward with your pieces, no attack exists. So, that is how you attack in chess. And a little bit of, review on opposite side castling, okay? Another good rule of thumb, one final rule of thumb, +2. You should have 2 more attacking pieces than they have defenders. If we go back to this game, my training game, we were analyzing something, but watch what I did. If we use the in a row technique, queen h6, knight g5, queen h7, that's what I did. That I created an attack by activating 3 pieces, and then it was very close to being game over. My opponent was preventing me from transferring my rook, you see? So preventing me from transferring my rook over. If my opponent had done something like a4, I would have gone here, and then like brought my rook to h4 potentially in the future. I have to take back. And this position is a very different story, because now I have backup, and this is very, very bad. But that is how you attack properly in chess. Rule of +2, in a row technique. This next one comes from an individual who's actually rated 1800, and they asked 2 questions. That's why it's 6 and 7, because they go together. How do you punish opponents who play passively? And how do you differentiate between gaining space and overextending? These 2 questions go together extremely well. Now, first we're going to look at actually legitimate openings that are passive. What does passive mean? What is space? So space is the amount of squares that you can control or fight for on your opponent's side of the board. Okay? In the beginning of the game, both sides have no space. Nobody can fight for anything on the other side. However, in the position that I'm showing, you see that black has kind of only pushed their pawns 1 rank and hasn't developed the pieces in a very traditional way. White has 3 pawns right in the middle of the board. So white has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, potentially 12 squares they fight for. Black fights for 1, 2, 3, and 4 with the knight. 12, 4. So white has more space. Black is more passive. But this is a correct way of playing passively, because even though you're playing passively, you're not jeopardizing future progress. What do I mean by that? Well, black can very quickly strike in the center. That might not be the best way to do it, because white will wedge this pawn forward. But like, just to show you how one simple trade, one pawn trade, now black has something in the center. Black is about to immediately finish development and be completely fine. One pawn move is all it takes. You have to play very accurately. So the thing about the correct passive play, you can basically freely improve your position. What do I mean by that? As long as your opponent continues to play passively, like knight d7, you can freely improve your position. When they actually start fighting you, like a slingshot, they're like, oh, they've been back, you have to be super accurate. And if you've played the wrong way and they have played the right way, they will equalize the position with no problem. Somehow it's crazy how quickly you can have no advantage anymore. White is losing here. After seemingly winning a pawn in the center, instant replay, white took a pawn, black took back, white's up a pawn. Can't take, because this is guarded. Knight g4 attacks the bishop and the pawn. So if you play something like bishop d4, I'm gonna take, and now everything is active. Now count the space. It's a totally different story. You can pause here and try to count. A totally different story. Space doesn't tell you everything about the position, right? So how quickly it can all turn around. So it's a mix of knowing your theory. And what I mean by theory is not, earlier I said baby stuff about the openings. You legitimately need to know the right move to play at the right moment. You memorize that stuff at the 1800 level, as this individual asked. If you're lower rated, you're an intermediate player, improve your position slowly and fight to break through on the square you control the most. What do I mean by that? e5. So if in a position like, let's say this, white wanted to break into black's position triumphantly, which pawn would you push? Now some of you might say e5 because I attacked the knight. Yes, but e5 also has the most support, and the most support in the smallest form. When pawns defend other things, your opponent is less likely to trade away their pieces because they're trading them for pawns. Whereas if you go like f5, I'm not so sure about this because even though it has support, is the queen really going to venture in against a full army? See, if you made it this far in the video, that sounds familiar. Remember I said that early on? I said the queen's not going to go fight the full house. The queen needs backup, all right? Queen's like a star on a loner team. It's not going to work. You need help. So you have to do it the right way. So you break through on the right square. Here's another great example. This is a variation for black known as the hedgehog. It is literally an anti-space variation. And black's breaks in this position are breaks like d5. So oftentimes what works is creating an attack on the king. Oftentimes when you dominate the space and your opponent doesn't have a lot of ways to break through, you can create a kingside attack because you use your space advantage. Almost think of it like Battleship. If you've blown up a bunch of empty squares and you're kind of encroaching on the territory of the ship, you start realizing that there's not much left to do. You're going to attack the ship, you're going to hit it. So the same thing applies here, but you need to do it the right way. In the hedgehog, if you're not careful and you play like just a random move, at a certain point, black will break out. And that's what you need to think about in passive positions. Now, for my lower rated players, some passive positions are stupid. So for example, let's say you begin with the queen's pawn, your opponent goes here. You're like, all right, that's interesting. I'm going to develop. And they go here. Or the classic one, the two center pawns. This is not good. It's a little bit harder to break, but it's not good. Like, why are you blocking in your bishops? They're so sad, right? But something that actually legitimately weakens the king, you take the center as much as you can. If they play some stupid stuff, like I'm playing completely idiotic things, improve your position freely. And then if they just never, ever, ever fight for the center, at a certain point, break through or use everything else you've learned in this video. Oh, they want a castle? Levy taught me about opposite side castling. And then I'm going to go create an attack. I'm going to pawn storm, right? If you just play on autopilot, like you just short castle, that's completely fine as well. But you need to break through at some point. And that's where it's going to get trickier. Because I'd like to tell you every single time you should play like this, but you can't. It depends on the position. Like this is completely idiotic. But if you play like one bad move, and then your opponent kind of blocks things up, and then you trade, and then you make another bad trade, well, now you're losing a piece. Oops, you got forked. That's protected. So chess is a hard game. I said that at the beginning, I'm saying it now. But general rules apply. Improve your position freely. Look out for the breaks in the position at some point that can try to begin fighting back at you. And monitor where they're castling to see if you can go create an attack on them, because the space advantage and attack is very much possible. For question number 8, let us welcome back Yusuf, who also asked us earlier how to create an attack properly on your opponent. He asked us, how do you play a closed position? Okay, what is a closed position? You see in front of you. Closed positions, your best friends are pawns. Pawns. Pawns determine whether the position is closed or not. Pawns are the defense of the position. If both sides have 8 pawns and they're kind of locked up, it's going to be a closed position. The more pawns you trade, the more the game opens up. So if both sides have 4 pawns, how the hell are you going to put up the wall of pawns, right? So pawn breaks. And pawn breaks had very important moments. Like, I just got to this position by beginning with a French defense, advanced variation, c5, c3, c4. c4 is an awful move. Like, black in all these lines keeps the tension on the center, right? So oftentimes this happens at intermediate level. It's a lot rare to have completely pure closed positions as the level of the games goes on, because the players are playing theoretical stuff and not just arbitrarily locking the position. Because look, be honest with yourselves, like my triple digit ELO viewers, at some point you're like, haha, oh, sorry, not F3, but also that. You're like, haha, I'm gonna lock the entire position because that's funny. Whereas the high-rated players are like, I've been studying this course for hours. Let me actually go put in a little bit more dedicated work. But pawn breaks. So for example, here the best move for white is a little b3. Don't just go lock everything. A correct pawn trade goes a long way. And even if you trade one pawn, now you've opened up the rook, you've opened up the bishop, and you can advance with space. Use everything that you've learned in this video. More space. Create an attack. Opposite side castling, right? The rule of in a row for attacking. All that good stuff. It all kind of flows. That's why I set up the video like this. By the way, can I just say, if you're watching this far in the video, thank you so much. You're incredible. Pawn breaks. Closed position, pawn breaks. If you get a position that does resemble the one that looked like this, pawn breaks still apply. But which ones? If you play a move like b3, it's not a bad move. It just doesn't really pose a threat. And you might be like, I need to trade pawns. Levy told me to. But after this, the bishop just came alive so intensely. Like, that bishop was stuck behind a wall. You knocked the wall down, and you had to pay for it. Like, all the damages, right? Like, the bishop didn't have to do anything. The bishop was like, oh, I got a view. Nice. So you need to trade the right way. If you just keep belligerently going at it, I'm not so sure it's the best thing in the world. However, if your opponent accidentally splits all their pawns, now they're sitting ducks. So now you can take the pawn, which can lead to the capture of the pawn, and the pawn, and the pawn. So everything falls apart. So in this position, the position's equal. After one simple pawn capture, the evaluation goes to +4. And for those of you that know what that means 4 pawn advantage for white, even though white is a pawn down. Yeah, because the whole structure will now collapse. So pawn breaks. In positions where, like, this is a legitimate opening, it's known as the exchange Slav variation. Here there are 7 pawns aside, and everything that you've learned in this video continues to apply. But here, pawn breaks are probably not going to work. Like, the only pawn break for white that really works is e4, and it's not necessarily a bad move. It could work, but you are kind of weakening this pawn in the process. Maybe you like it, maybe you don't. Doesn't lose tactically. But what could happen in a position like this that just gets quite locked and pawn breaks don't really do anything, let's just arbitrarily make the position something like this. Although I guess that would kind of weaken b5. Okay, let's not. We don't do this on the fly. Remember all the positional stuff you learned in this video? You gotta find ways to get the knights to those squares. Like maybe a knight reroute. So what I mean by that is something like, bishop b1, and maybe you're going to put the knight on f4, and then on d3, and then on c5. And your knight will live on this square. That's called an outpost square. A square on your opponent's side of the board that you control, and where your piece can sit and exert pressure. Or you'll put the knight right here. So in close positions, backwards maneuvering to certain squares, working backwards to improve your position, while no pawn breaks exist, is another very good way to play. And if you remember earlier about imbalances, right now, this is an incredible move because this bishop sucks. So it doesn't matter you gave away your bishop because now you made weaknesses for your opponent. Going back in chess is okay, especially if they are reacting to you because you're making your opponent do things. That's generally a good thing. And that's kind of a little bit about how you play close positions. Question number 9 is a little bit of a simple one, and I'm actually going to answer it because I don't really need a chessboard. What is a good rating to start expanding your opening repertoire? The key word is expanding. That means, and I don't know if this person was implying this, that you already have certain openings. So you should literally, I'm not joking when I say this, if you want to diligently study the game of chess, you really should give every opening that you've learned a couple hundred games. Good games, not bullet games on the toilet at work. Legitimately a couple of hundred games. Not all openings will suit you. You might even buy a course like one of mine and go, I can't win with this. No one plays the stuff that I'm studying. That's fine. But the only way to build experience and get better at certain positions to then hit the check boxes that I've shown you in this video, plans, trades, pawn breaks, attacking sequences from openings, only will be learned through hundreds of games of practice. And if that sounds too intimidating to you, that's okay. That's life. We all make decisions about how much we want to study. Now, if the question is, when do you learn openings? You can learn openings whenever. You're going to hear a lot of different things from a lot of different people, entitled players. Don't learn openings. Start with the endgames. If you want to learn openings, go ahead. That's the beautiful thing about the game of chess. If you get the basics, but you're kind of like, I'm sort of making things up every single game, so go learn an opening, a simple one, a setup-based opening, like the London system. Don't go study the Najdorf Sicilian. So beginning opening study, 500-600 maybe. If you really want to, just dabble a little bit, just do a little dabbling. 900-1000 is around the level you're really going to start seeing it work. And do not make the same mistakes in openings. Learn your opening, go play some practice games, and don't make the same mistakes 10 times. What's the point of investing in an opening course or trying to learn an opening if you're going to make the same mistake in the opening 10 times? Make it 3 times, then stop, okay? And then as you climb that ladder, there's no arbitrary rating, but 1,1500, you get chess. You get it. It's a hard game, but you've gotten it, all right? So at that point, you can start playing around with different openings, but the only way you're really gonna know if you know the opening or not is after hundreds of games of practice. Question number 10 was so giant, it completely crossed the entire screen. What do you do when an opponent plays a strange move, especially an opening that you haven't prepared for, like when you're using an opening line? Oh, I told you. Aren't you glad you stuck around? Everybody loves this question. So let's jump into it. So here's the thing. At the highest level of the game, and advanced intermediate, like 1900, if a person plays a move that is bad, or no, let's put it this way. If a person plays a move that you've never seen before, there's a chance you don't know it, and there's a chance it's good. That is how the Grandmasters surprise each other. Below about 1500, if the opponent has played something that you have not studied, or let's put it this way, isn't featured in the book that you got, it's probably bad. The alternative is that it's good and you didn't study it, but I'm just going to say it. Let's say you studied everything, okay? So what do I mean by that? Well, let's say e4. Okay, very simple. Caro-Kann defense, pawn to d4, and you play the advanced variation. Move 3. 3, that's it, move 3. Here there are 2 lines. c5 and bishop f5. And by the way, if you're confused, you're like, you have to memorize stuff? Yes, that's yes. But let's say your opponent plays f6. Okay? So after f6, black is almost lost. No joke. Like, I would beat 9 GMs out of 10. Maybe Magnus Carlsen would save this position again. Like, this is a terrible position for black. Terrible. It's so bad. Okay? Why? Because the knight now can't develop. This is just not, it's just, it makes my skin crawl. The king is weak. Everything's weak. But if you take, well, now black is almost better. I mean, black is still fighting for equality, but like, you've just given away all your center space. I mean, it's like black is playing white. Black has much more development than you do, right? So when a bad move happens, or a move that you haven't prepared for happens, you need to think about and be able to explain in a setting the ideas behind your opening. And you need to learn that you don't quickly snap off pieces. You need to evaluate all trades early on and try to improve your position in a coordinated way. So if your opponent plays, let's say, a6, just a random move, not a bad move, doesn't weaken anything, how does white continue? All these moves are almost the same. Knight to f3, bishop to d3, bishop to e3, c4, knight c3. All those moves are the same. However, if at this point you decide to play queen to h5, I'm like, what are you do? What? No, that doesn't, no. So a move like f4 is good to take more space with pawns. If you can take space and connect as many pawns together as possible, I'll give you an example, something like c3. Like, look at this. But now, which bishop do you want to trade? The dark squared bishop. You see, this is the way I want you thinking about stuff. So you have more space, right? That does look pretty good. If you don't want to play like that, get pieces out, play normal, and don't just snap stuff. If stuff is defended in your position and you have more space, try to keep it together. You have more space, don't trade stuff, right? That's the way you got to think about it. But what if the opponent plays something offbeat and aggressive? So London players get this sometimes, like f6, f6. And then their opponent goes here, and they're like, oh my god, my bishop is going to get trapped. No, when they play aggressively, understand that they are not playing, like, this would be in every opening scores for black if it worked. It doesn't. It's +2. Stupid flank pawn stuff where they push all their pawns is obviously bad. What's the threat? Okay. H3 or H4. And let's say they're like, I don't know what to do. I'm just going to go bishop f5. Use everything you've learned in this video. Okay? Black has a little bit more space on this side of the board, but a lot less development. All right? What do you know about your London? The bishop has gone off, so you can play a move like c4, right? Oftentimes, belligerent aggression on one side that doesn't make any sense can be met in the center and on the other side of the board. Don't go compromising your position with moves like this. What is that? And even that is okay, because you're kind of dealing with a threat. Don't play your position to the tune of your opponent. Stay principled. Put pawns in front of knights, right? Put pawns together into the center of the board. I know I'm giving you more general stuff. You'd love for me to be like, well, I always get attacked in this variation of my opening. So analyze it with a computer. Not during the game, after. Analyze it and learn. Dissect that information, absorb it like a sponge. Okay, the next time I see this and this, I'm going to play it so-and-so. I'll give you an example. Earlier today, I was playing an English opening. I had the black pieces. This is how you learn openings, okay? It was e5. I played c4, e5. My opponent played the move g3. I played knight f6, bishop g2, and c6. The idea is to go d5, okay? Opponent played knight f3, attacking my pawn. We all knew the theory. I know all this line. Here. Opponent went here. I played a5, here, a4. I knew up until this point, I knew 100% of the games here went knight d2. I knew that. But then my opponent played bishop e3, attacking my queen. I was like, I've never seen that move before. And for good reason. It's a terrible move, but I didn't react correctly. The best move here for black, it's a blitz game, is just to block the attack. And now the knight is still under fire, and the pawn on b2 is lost. This can't be taken because my bishop guards it. Simple move, but it was a blitz game, so instead I gave like a random check. I thought this was a creative move. And then my opponent went back, and then we had a game. But I ended up losing. I didn't punish the opening mistake. I went back and I looked, and I was like, oh my god, I'm so stupid. Okay, boom, that's it. I'm never going to make the same mistake again. But obviously, it's not the same. If you're 1100, there is a high chance you make the same mistake again. So you have to, if you're going to just play chess for fun, just do it for fun. But if you're trying to get better, hold yourself accountable. And that is how you will improve in the opening and all other phases of the game. Folks, I know I said this earlier, but if you made it this far, I don't know how long this video is. I'm currently recording one giant file. We are 78 minutes into the recording. Obviously, the video is going to be shorter because there's a lot of interruptions. Honestly, I tried to put the best answers that I could to these questions. If they were helpful, do let me know in the comments. If there's ever any more questions, addendum questions, I'm happy to do this again. I hope this video really does change your chess life and makes you think about the game better. I cannot give you all the answers. I'm trying to give you the tools and the instructions, and occasionally you can call me if you're confused. Not during the games, though. So that's the goal, okay? That's the goal of all this and the channel. I appreciate you very much, okay? Peace out. I'll see you in the next video. Get out of here!